The room was colder than expected, not because of the temperature, but because of the weight it held. Buried deep beneath federal jurisdiction, surrounded by silence and suspicion, the chamber buzzed with unspoken tension. It was past midnight. The walls were thick enough to mute a scream, yet thin enough for secrets to seep through. Cameras sat poised, steady red lights blinking like silent observers to a crime scene not yet confessed. Dozens of eyes, government officials, press members, hardened investigators, stared forward, waiting. Not a soul breathed with ease. The air felt stiff with something darker than fear. Anticipation soaked in dread. Kash Patel leaned forward, his hand slightly shaking as he adjusted the microphone. The tremor wasn't weakness. It was fury controlled too long. His eyes, once soft with idealism, now carried shadows carved by betrayal. The months spent chasing whispers, burying friends, and dissecting truths had changed him. There was no going back now. Pam Bondi sat beside him, her posture impeccable, her composure stone-like. But beneath the calm, her pulse thudded against, her ribs rapid and hard. She knew the power of silence in a courtroom. But this wasn't court. This was war disguised as a briefing. It's time the world knows who Bill Gates really is, Pam said, her voice slicing through the quiet like a scalpel. Across the room, a reporter dropped her pen. The screen behind them flickered to life. An image appeared, a close-up of a steel-encased hard drive, etched with the words, Project Eden. Its label glared under the lights like a warning from the future. Kash cleared his throat. He didn't just fund research. He funded silence. He buried witnesses, manipulated systems, and disguised unethical trials as humanitarian aid. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Disbelief tangled with morbid curiosity. One of the interns, no older than 20, covered her mouth in horror. Pam interjected, her voice firmer now. We're not here to speculate. We have names, locations, bank transfers, and if you doubt that, look inside this drive. She turned toward Kash. Their eyes met. For a split second, everything else vanished. The cameras, the crowd, the danger. They had been partners in justice, but somewhere along the lines of encrypted files and threats, they'd become something more. She knew he'd take a bullet for her. He already had, in 1,000 quiet ways. Kash nodded to the tech team. Start playback, he said quietly. The screen dimmed. Then a grainy video began. A young scientist speaking through tears, voice quivering as she described human trials, secret labs, and medical protocols rewritten under pressure. Behind her, through a cracked door, children's screams echoed faintly. Gasps filled the room. One senator rose from his seat in disbelief. Kash's voice, now steel-wrapped, filled the silence. This is just the beginning. What you're about to see will haunt you. No one moved. No one spoke. The unravelling had begun. The room remained silent long after the footage ended. The only sound, a distant hum from the overhead lights. Kash turned off the screen, but the images lingered in everyone's minds. The horror wasn't in what was said. It was in what had been buried for years under false benevolence and charitable headlines. A week earlier, Kash had stood outside a small farmhouse in rural Montana, its windows shattered by time and its soil stained by something heavier than memory. The locals spoke of a woman, Dr. Elise Thorne, who had once led a government-funded health project there. Brilliant, reclusive, and relentless in her ethics, Elise had sounded the alarm months before her sudden death. Authorities ruled it a suicide. Kash knew better. She didn't kill herself, he had muttered to Pam during their drive back from the site. eyes fixed on the road, fists clenched. She was silenced. Pam didn't respond at first. She was staring at the file on her lap. Photos of Elise's bruised neck, inconsistent with hanging. She wasn't surprised. What haunted her was how familiar this pattern had become. Buried leads, missing evidence, autopsies rewritten to serve political comfort. She was a threat to someone powerful, Pam said at last, her voice colder than the wind whipping outside the car. And that someone wears a halo when the cameras are on. Bill Gates. The name sat like poison in their throats. To the public, he was a savior, philanthropist, visionary, the man funding vaccine research and educational reform. But behind the charm, behind the press-ready smiles, was something darker. Gates didn't just control funding. He controlled people, policies, and the narratives that shaped them. Dr. Thorne had found something in that Montana trial: irregular consent forms, altered medical records, children pulled from rural homes without documented guardians. Then she vanished. Detective Ray Mercer, the local cop assigned to her death, had shrugged it off. Some people just snap, he'd said, chewing on a toothpick, indifferent. But when Kash traced Mercer's financials, the truth cracked through. 3 payments wired from a dummy NGO linked to the Gates Foundation. You know what this means, right? Kash had whispered as they stood in a dingy motel outside Bozeman. We're not just going after Gates. We're dragging half of Washington with us. Pam's eyes flicked to the ceiling. Then we better not miss. The drive back had been quiet, but charged. Something unspoken hung in the air between them. Not just the weight of the investigation, but something more human. In the silence of dusty highways and dim-lit motels, their partnership had blurred. When Pam reached for the file and her fingers grazed Kash's, neither of them pulled away. Back in D.C., threats started arriving. Subtle, invasive. Her sister's car was found keyed with the word traitor. His emails were breached. And then came the surveillance. A black SUV that showed, up outside their homes too often to be coincidence. Senator Greer was the final confirmation. His name showed up in a hidden ledger on Project Eden, just beneath a list of Tier 1 funders. Kash remembered watching the man on national television weeks prior, preaching transparency and ethics. Hypocrisy had a face now, as the present day. Briefing approached, Kash and Pam moved like ghosts through corridors of power, no longer sure who was listening, who had sold out, or who might be next. They were alone, but not entirely. They had each other. You ever think about what happens if we lose? Kash asked her the night before the hearing. Pam turned to him, eyes shadowed by fatigue and something deeper. Every day. But I think more about what happens if we don't try. Their hands touched again. Not accidental this time. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was necessary. There were no promises, no declarations, just understanding. And so, as the press lights flared and the hard drive was revealed, they stood side by side. Not just whistleblowers, not just warriors for justice, but 2 broken people trying to fix a world that had long stopped caring about truth. The real story, they both knew, was only beginning. Kash couldn't sleep. The numbers on his laptop screen swam in front of his eyes. Wire transfers, dummy corporations, encrypted memos masked as philanthropic grants. The deeper he went, the more grotesque the web became. Gates's foundation, long praised for its transformative investments in health innovation, had quietly funneled over $40 million to a set of nondescript bio-research labs buried across Europe and the American Midwest. On paper, these labs focused on neurological behavior mapping. Off record, they were testing compounds that dulled emotional responses in children. An experiment in psychological silencing. Neurological behavioral inhibitors, Kash muttered aloud, the term tasting like rot in his mouth. He leaned back in the motel chair, rubbing his temples. God, what the hell were they doing to those kids? Pam stood in the doorway, her silhouette tense against the flickering hallway light. She had just returned from a meeting with someone she only referred to as Alice. The woman had once worked as a nurse in one of the shuttered labs outside Bratislava. She came trembling, glancing over her shoulder every 2 minutes. She claimed the lab had burned down just days after a boy began having seizures from an unapproved serum. She said Gates himself visited the facility 3 months prior. No press, no records, just a black SUV and a warning. This work must stay quiet. She was terrified, Pam said, walking in and shutting the door behind her. And now she's missing. Kash looked up sharply. What do you mean, missing? She didn't show up for the follow-up. I called the safe house. It was cleared out. Papers gone. Phone lines dead. Kash's face hardened. But before he could speak, Pam held out her phone. On the screen was a still from lab security footage. Gates, unmistakably. Him, exiting the facility hours before the fire. He wore no smile this time, only calculation. We're not dealing with a man, she said quietly. We're dealing with a system, one that rewards monsters for wearing masks. That night, everything changed. The journalist they had trusted to publish the first wave of findings, Frank Mallory, a bulldog of a man known for tearing into the pharmaceutical elite, was found dead off Interstate 83. Brake failure, the headline claimed. The footage told another story. His car didn't slide, it swerved, violently, intentionally. There were marks on the undercarriage, consistent with sabotage. Pam hadn't cried in years. But when she saw the footage, her lips trembled. He had 2 kids, a wife battling cancer. He was our last megaphone. The threats came next. An envelope slipped into her mailbox. No return address, only a single photograph. Her youngest daughter stepping off the school bus. That same night, her phone buzzed with an untraceable number. She answered, breath caught in her chest. There was no voice, just a recording. Her private conversation with Kash 2 nights earlier, word for word. I can't do this if it means putting them at risk. She whispered in the dark, staring at her children asleep in the next room. You don't have to, Kash said, sitting beside her. But I do. I have to see this through. Because if I don't, all the things I stood for, all the oaths I swore, they mean nothing. She looked at him then, not just as a partner in truth, but as a man shaped by regret, as someone willing to throw himself into the fire to protect what he still believed could be saved. Their hands met again, not in fear this time, but in a silent, burning resolve. Kash couldn't stop thinking about his early career, the polished suits, the pledges of loyalty to defense and democracy. He remembered briefing rooms where decisions were made in cold logic, lives reduced to numbers. And he remembered how proud he once felt, believing he was part of something noble. Now he saw the rot beneath that pride. I helped build the walls they're hiding behind, he confessed. Now I have to tear them down. Pam didn't offer comfort. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Outside, the city moved like it always had, indifferent. But inside that small apartment, something shifted. Betrayal no longer shocked them. Fear no longer paralyzed them. What they felt now, burning and silent, was clarity. As the clock ticked past midnight, Kash clicked send on an encrypted batch of files. The whistleblower was gone. The journalist was dead. But the truth had momentum now. And in a war this calculated, momentum could be lethal. The hearing room buzzed with tension even before Kash and Pam stepped into the light. Marble pillars lined the chamber like silent judges, and the scent of polished oak mingled with sweat and anticipation. Rows of reporters leaned forward, pens poised, eyes sharp. Government officials lined the dais, faces unreadable, some indifferent, others visibly shaken. It was no longer a matter of belief. It was about proof. Kash's voice, steady but filled with barely contained fury, cut through the silence. We are here today not with theories, but with receipts. A massive monitor flickered to life. On screen, the first wave of data scrolled. Into view, bank transactions from offshore accounts under shell corporations. Each line was linked to black site research compounds, operating without government oversight. Pam narrated alongside him, her voice clear and clipped, never trembling. These are not conjectures. They're financial arteries leading from the Gates Foundation to illegal testing facilities, some in conflict zones, others hidden in plain sight under humanitarian covers. Murmurs rippled through the room like distant thunder. Kash clicked again. Testimonies began to play. Recordings of survivors, now adults, recounting childhoods marked by forced injections, seizures, emotional flatlining. One young woman, eyes hollow, spoke in Spanish. We were numbers to them. When we cried, they called it inconvenient feedback. The room shifted. Phones rose. The air thickened with disbelief. Then came the recording. A private conversation, captured during what was believed to be a secure investor briefing. Gates' voice, calm and rehearsed, spoke over background clinks of glasses and soft jazz. What we're doing is laying the groundwork for predictive emotional response engineering. Once we control fear, we control compliance. Pam didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had gone dead silent. Even the chairman, a seasoned political survivor, had gone pale. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Twice, then again, security stirred at the corners of the chamber, whispering into earpieces. A ripple of panic passed through the press corps, but Kash stood firm, gaze locked on the crowd. We're not finished. A soft chime signaled the final blow. The last encrypted file decrypted on screen. A time-stamped video from a nameless jungle facility. Children sat on makeshift beds, IVs dripping unmarked solutions into their veins. Nurses in masks jotted notes as the kids' expressions dulled, eyes blanking out like switched-off screens. A logo in the corner bore the name of a fake charity, one linked to Gates through 4 layers of legal redirection. People stood. Some gasped. A few reporters broke into sobs. One shouted, "You funded this?" Security rushed forward as Gates's attorney scrambled to the mic, voice cracking. "Objection! This evidence is illegally—" "Sit down!" the chairman barked. "You'll have your turn." But it was too late. The illusion had already shattered. Hours later, in a private interview room beneath the courthouse, Gates sat, alone across from a federal investigator. The cameras were off, but the energy in the room was charged. The smirk that had long played on his face, confident, smug, began to dissolve. His fingers tapped an uneven rhythm on the table, betraying what his expression refused to admit. The investigator leaned in, tone almost gentle. "Why children?" A beat of silence. Gates's lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. His eyes darted toward the mirrored wall, then down to his clasped hands. For the first time, silence felt like an answer. In the observation room, Kash and Pam watched, unblinking. He turned slightly toward her. "This isn't justice," he said quietly. "Not yet, but it's something." She didn't speak. Her hand found his beneath the table, fingers intertwining in a quiet show of solidarity. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about making sure someone, somewhere, finally paid. The truth had come out. Raw, bleeding, and impossible to bury. The days that followed the hearing were a strange blend of chaos and silence. Gates vanished. No statements, no sightings, not even a prepared denial from his PR team. His foundation's website, once filled with optimistic banners about global health, was stripped of content. Partnerships unraveled. Tech executives distanced themselves. Donors withdrew quietly, as if hoping their names would fade with the scandal. But nothing was quiet anymore. Kash found himself at the center of both. Praise and scrutiny. Survivors' families flooded his inbox with gratitude, sending handwritten letters, videos, even tokens of remembrance. Photos of lost siblings, scanned medical records, relics of buried truths. Yet, on Capitol Hill, another story brewed. Formal ethics review was launched against him, spearheaded by those who had long benefited from Gates's silent influence. The irony wasn't lost on him. In a quiet hallway outside the ethics chamber, Pam caught his arm. "They'll try to bury you too," she whispered. He gave her a tired smile. "They can try, but the ground's already shifting." She didn't smile back. Her resignation had just been made public. Her press statement, though brief, was raw. "There comes a point," she'd said, "where continuing means betraying yourself." The words echoed louder than she expected. Within hours, her resignation became a rallying cry on social media. Venture, moral trauma trended in dozens of cities. As she walked away from him that day, she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The bond forged between them during the storm no longer needed words. Elsewhere, justice was trickling in odd forms. Dr. Elise's family received a call from the National Ethics Committee. Her journal, once dismissed as the ramblings of a disgraced whistleblower, was being inducted into the National Archive as a permanent exhibit on medical violations and scientific abuse. Her son, barely out of high school, posted a simple message online. "Mom, they finally heard you. Senator Greer didn't survive the wave." A leaked audio clip revealed him pressuring witnesses to remain silent. The party expelled him. His seat was left empty. No replacement was named, but not everyone accepted the truth. Conspiracy forums lit up, calling the evidence staged, accusing Kash and Pam of political theatre. At the same time, cities filled with protesters, mothers holding pictures of missing children, young scientists demanding reform, teachers reading out the names of trial victims. A country once indifferent had been shaken awake. Kash stood outside the Capitol building one last time. Cameras surrounded him, questions hurled like stones. But he said nothing. He watched the crowd instead, watched as Pam emerged from the steps, paused, and looked directly at him. There was no smile, no nod, just a long, silent acknowledgement they had brought the truth into the light. It hadn't saved everyone. It hadn't erased the scars, but it was enough to begin. The rain had started just as the crowd began to disperse. Soft at first, then steady, like the sky had waited until the noise was gone to finally weep. Kash stood still under the grey wash, tie loosened, face unreadable. Somewhere behind him, a reporter shouted his name again, but the voice was distant now, muffled by something heavier than rain. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, not at anything in particular, just through it all. A voice began, not spoken aloud, but echoing within, as if the weight of everything needed a vessel. It was never about a man. The words came slow, deliberate. It was about what power becomes when it's unchallenged. We handed him our trust like currency. We crowned him with accolades, with funding, with blind faith. And in return, we got broken silence. The footage still haunted him. The cries, the dark eyes of children caught in something monstrous, the dispassionate precision of men in masks. But worse than the cruelty was the calm. How methodical it had all been. We ask ourselves, how did this happen? As if evil arrives with fanfare. But it didn't come in a single night. It crept in slowly. Every time a document was shredded, a report buried, a survivor ignored. It came when looking away became easier than asking questions. Pam had once told him, "The truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it only whispers." She was right. The truth had lived in fractured statements, encrypted drives, old journals no one wanted to read. Justice hadn't arrived in thunder. It had unfolded in hushed conversations and the courage of a dying few who refused to vanish without being heard. The voice deepened in his chest now, no longer internal, but meant for everyone who had watched. We think monsters hide in shadows, but the real ones walk among us, dressed in vision and progress. The true enemy was never a single man. It was the culture that applauded him, the world that let him build walls so high no one dared peek behind. He looked up, droplets clinging to his lashes. Somewhere in that crowd, someone still believed in the lie. Somewhere else, another child was still missing. The camera caught his face in full for one last shot. Tired, haunted, but clear. Now ask yourself, his voice broke slightly, how much truth are you really willing to see? Screen went black. No credits, no music, just silence.